Welcome to the Aeronautical Information Optimization Summit. Today's topic, Everything Unmanned Aircraft Systems, or UAS. Today, we're talking about the delivery of aeronautical information that's very different for this important community. I'm Abby Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of Aviation Policy and Plans at FAA. And for the past years, I've had the distinct pleasure of being the executive champion for the modernization of notices to airmen, or NOTAMs. Our summit series is focused on a major priority for the FAA, and that's the modernization of NOTAM and aeronautical information. We are committed to creating a system that works for our future airspace and for you, the users of our airspace. And I'd like to introduce you to a very special guest who shares this view, our very own Administrator, Steve Dixon. Administrator Dixon, please join us.
Thanks, Abby, and it's nice to see you again and to see everyone out there. This is a topic, as you well know, that's near and dear to my heart. I couldn't be happier to be here with everybody at today's Aeronautical Information Optimization Summit. And I think we've actually had to reschedule this once or twice due to other responsibilities that I've had, but it really is, this is absolutely core to our mission at the agency. And Abby, I appreciate your leadership and collaboration and the role that you played in moving this forward. As many of you have probably heard me say, data accessibility and information, aeronautical information, is very important to me, both as a former military pilot and commercial aviator, and here in this in my role at the FAA. Data is critical to aviation and aviation safety. It's really the lifeblood of every single flight. And it's been always this way for traditional operators like commercial airlines, pilots, dispatchers, and also general aviation pilots. And it's also true, as we're talking about today, for new entrants in the skies, like drone pilots. Back in the day, I flew the F-15 Eagle. And so whenever I see the word Eagle in the headlines, in the news, I take a little bit of interest because I wonder if it pertains to my previous experience. And just the other day, I saw a story, and it was an aviation story actually about an actual Eagle, not an F-15. And I don't know whether you would call this a bird strike or a drone strike, but it was actually an encounter that this Eagle had with a drone. And it was actually up in the state of Michigan. They were using a drone to document erosion on the shoreline of Lake Michigan. And unfortunately, an eagle, which is a bird of prey, took exception to this drone's presence and infringing upon his airspace. So the bird actually attacked the drone, tore off a propeller and caused it to fall into Lake Michigan. It took them 3 search attempts, but finally, they found the drone in shallow water off the shoreline. And the state agency's communications office, as you might imagine, had a little bit of fun with this. They put out a tongue-in-cheek press release saying that the Eagle referred all requests for comment to a Lake Michigan burbot fish. Now, if you're familiar with this kind of fish, it's nicknamed lawyerfish. And lawyerfish had a few choice words, saying that the laws of nature are not to be trifled with, and that blatantly violating the Eagle's airspace will no longer be tolerated. So, this is kind of a funny story, but it highlights how drones are increasingly being used for so many different purposes now in our airspace. The technology continues to evolve rapidly with more kinds of applications that the industry is dreaming up every day. And we're seeing that, again, on a daily basis here at the FAA. In 2019, we had more than 162,000 certified remote pilots, and we expect that number to more than double in the next 5 years. The FAA is taking many steps to safely integrate drones into the National Airspace System. For example, through the FAA's Integration Pilot Program, which we call the IPP, and because of Secretary Elaine Chao's leadership, we've collaborated with state, local, and tribal communities across the U.S. to conduct and evaluate real-world drone operations for a wide range of purposes. Through the IPP, UPS and Wing Aviation became America's first FAA-certified air carrier operations for drone package deliveries. Extremely significant progress in that space. Wing Aviation is partnering with local businesses to deliver products to people's homes in Christiansburg, Virginia. And UPS Flight Forward is delivering prescription medication to a retirement community in Florida and conducting routine medical deliveries in Raleigh, North Carolina, and also near Charlotte. So this is just the beginning. We're just beginning to scratch the surface. At these sites, drones are proving that they can increase crop yields, assess hurricane damage, particularly important with today's landfall of Laura down in Louisiana, and reduce the time it takes to conduct aircraft inspections. I've seen this up close and personal, and give police officers and first responders an early assessment of a 911 call scene. Drones are also supporting COVID-19 response efforts by delivering medical equipment and PPE to frontline workers. It's a great example of how government and the private sector and academic partners are working together to find creative solutions to help people during this public health emergency. Now, the data that we're collecting from all this work will inform our future endeavors. And some of these things seem to be the stuff of science fiction, really not too long ago at all. For example, in the not too distant future, we could see the idea of advanced air mobility, where a person could take an unmanned air taxi across town or to the airport. But we've still got some important policy and safety issues to address. We're working to finalize the remote identification rule by the end of this year. We need to tackle the technical challenges of drone operations conducted beyond visual line of sight. And we're still in the early stages of UAS traffic management. So we're teaming up with NASA, the industry, and other entities to make progress in all of these areas and even more. The bottom line is that to achieve true integration of the skies, we need to establish effective methods to deliver and communicate aeronautical information to drone pilots to ensure safe operations. And I say drone pilots very intentionally. It's important to remember that that's what they are. And I realize many of you joining us today are. You are pilots who are navigating the National Airspace System just like any other pilot of a manned aircraft. Drone pilots will increasingly share the airspace with other users, and the safety of everyone in the NAS hinges upon everyone understanding the rules of the sky and having data about the National Airspace System. So toward that end, we're modernizing the FAA's Notice to Airmen, or NOTAM system, to efficiently communicate aeronautical information to everyone who uses the airspace, including drone pilots, of course. For example, drone pilots need to have access to information about temporary flight restrictions, airspace and national security restrictions, and special use airspace. The delivery and accessibility of aeronautical data must work for all airspace users. We've got to get it to you in the most usable form possible. The drone industry continues to grow and evolve rapidly. We know that we've got to modernize aeronautical data, which means providing a single digital source that is sortable and machine readable. The easier it is to access, filter, and use the data, the safer all NAS operators will be. So we need input from the drone community so that we can provide the information that you need in a timely fashion, the way you need it and can understand it. So I ask you to engage with us in today's session and working forward and beyond today. It's extremely important that we collaborate and have the best products out there that we can. Tell us how to provide aeronautical data that will continue to support your safe operations. So again, thanks for your time and attention and participation today. It's extremely valuable to us, and I hope the information that we're sharing with you during this forum is valuable to you as well. So back to you, Abby, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Administrator Dixon. You're exactly right about the need to connect aeronautical information with airspace users in a way they want to receive it. We really appreciate you taking time out to spend with us today. And after all, it's the reason why we're here today. Today, our focus is on the communication of aeronautical information for new entrants. We'll get started with a short overview of drones and why the new entrant community is integral to the aeronautical information conversation. We'll also be talking about the changes that we are making and that we've made to aeronautical information that benefits new entrants. And the most important thing we're going to be doing today is we want to answer as many of your questions as we possibly can. To get the conversation started, I'd like to ask Jeannie Schiffer to join me on camera. As the Deputy Administrator for FAA Communications, every single day, Jeannie connects people with the information and the data they need to operate safely in the national airspace system. Hey, Jeannie, good to see you. Can you tell
Abby.
us a little bit about you? Love the scarf.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm excited to get to wear a scarf. Again, I'm the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Communications here at the FAA. And I'm really excited that we've got a lot of new entrants joining us here today. And when I say new entrants, I mean drone pilots and also representatives from the space industry. These two technologies are redefining our airspace. And these users have unique needs in terms of how we communicate aeronautical information. For digital natives, and most drone pilots are digital natives, aeronautical information is delivered in near real time through a cell phone or an app. And the technology is here to stay. So we're working to modernize our system to ensure it's robust enough to meet the needs of everyone who's joining us here today.
Thanks, Jeannie. So will you give our audience some of the housekeeping information, please, for today?
Sure, let's do it. So for those who are on Zoom, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. If you're on social media live stream, use the link that's provided. And in addition to monitoring the Q&A to ask live questions, we've got some subject matter experts who are standing by to respond to your questions and help us out with the live questions.
Hey, Jeannie, one thing I didn't hear you talk about was to remind people that this session is being recorded.
That's right. It is being recorded today. So if you know people who weren't able to join us, they can go back to our FAA YouTube channel and check out today's session. So thanks for that reminder, Abby. And one final note, if you're experiencing any challenges with the live environment, you might want to turn off your VPN and reconnect to the Zoom webinar. And we are in a live environment, Abby, and I do have 3 dogs, so they're sleeping right now. So let's just hope they stay quiet. So let's get down to business, Abby. Are you ready to talk drones and aeronautical information?
Oh yeah, let's go.
Okay, let's roll. As you know in the audience, all of you know drones are considered aircraft, and we heard the administrator talk about that. And just like all other aircraft, the rules require drone pilots, and yes, you are pilots, to be aware of aeronautical information, just as they do for airline pilots. So I'm going to invite my colleague, who some of you already know as the FAA drone guy, Kevin Morris, to tell us more. So Kevin, please join us. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Jeannie, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. Hey, Abby. So anyway, thanks for having me on. It's really, really nice to be here. As you probably know, I'm a bit passionate about drones. Drones are some of my favorite things to talk about. So I'm really looking forward to this today. We can continue this conversation with our drone community. So this should be some really good stuff we got going on today.
Thank you very much. And speaking of Kevin, talking about moving forward and from a regulatory standpoint, Abby, if I want to fly a drone, what do I need to know? And I'm sorry to bring up regulations so early, but it is important.
You know, it is because Jeannie, just like manned pilots, there are requirements that drone pilots have to meet. In 2016, the agency published the Small UAS Rule, otherwise known as Part 107, which clearly outlines what you can and you can't do with your drone. You can also fly as a recreational flyer under an exception for recreational flyers known as, this is a good one, 44809. So, well, you know what? I'm going to hop off here and let you and Kevin chat.
Okay. Over to you, Kevin. What's the most important thing that drone pilots need to remember before they fly?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's a question I get asked a lot. It as no surprise to any drone pilot that's attending today, there's a lot of information out there that they really need to know. And I think Abby touched on that just before she hopped off real quick, was that depending on what rule set you're flying under. So if you're flying under Part 107, or if you're, for example, flying under the exception for recreational flyers, or Section 44809, as we like to call it, there might be some different rules that apply to you. So I think one of the best things any drone flyer can do, whether they're a new entrant or they've been flying drones for a couple of years, is visit our website, faa.gov/UAS. This website is a great starting point for anybody interested in flying drones, because not only will you find a lot of information there, really good, useful stuff about drone flying, but if you're not exactly sure, what am I, Part 107 or am I a recreational flyer? We actually have tool sets on that website to walk you through the process to help you out, to sort of figure out maybe what bucket you're going to fall into before you start flying your drone. Probably the biggest difference between the two is if you're going to fly under Part 107, you'll need to have a remote pilot certificate. And there's a process you go through for that listed on our website. We take you through it, Jeannie, as you know, step by step, and we walk you through the process of obtaining that pilot certificate. Now, you may not need a remote pilot certificate to be a recreational flyer under the exception, but there are still some different rules that you need to be aware of. Again, all that information is right there on our website. And I think as long as I'm talking about websites, I should probably bring up maybe our most popular website, which is our FAA Drone Zone website. This really is a one-stop shop for just about everything you need for your drone. I mentioned Part 107 and recreational flyers. Well, regardless of which one of those rules you are going to operate under, you're more than likely going to need to register your drone. And our website, which you see on your screen there, our Drone Zone website, is where you can do that. And if you're operating under Part 107, there's a lot of waiver application programs that we have built into that. So for example, flying at night or maybe ops over people. Administrator Dixon mentioned going beyond visual line of sight. Those waivers are all accessed through our Drone Zone portal. So it really is a one-stop shop for pretty much everything you need, whether you're Part 107 or you're flying as a recreational flyer. So those two websites, I think, is where I would direct people to right away.
Okay, well, thank you, Kevin. And we also have a Drone Zone Twitter feed and a Drone Zone Facebook account as well. So they're all good resources. So thank you for that, Kevin. And we'll catch up with you a little later.
All right, sounds
right
good. See you in a bit.
Yep, right now we have somebody else we'd like to introduce. And if I had to guess, I'd say there are lots of people out there who don't realize drones are a type of aircraft, if we haven't mentioned that enough times already. And for the FAA, it's sometimes a challenge to reach those people. So how do we reach them, and how do we get them to understand what rules they need to follow and understand that they truly are pilots? So the perfect person to answer this question is Jay Merkel, the Executive Director of UAS Integration for the FAA. So Jay, please join us. I'm looking for Jay.
Well, Jeannie, it is a live environment, and so
It is live.
You know, it happens. And so since we're, I think we might have lost Jay's connection. Maybe we'll just invite the drone guy to come on back and pinch hit.
Or
I mean,
I can tell you.
Yeah.
Sure, I can tell you about, we've, as I mentioned earlier, we've got several social media accounts dedicated just to drones. You see there on the screen, we've got the FAA Drone Zone, and Facebook and Twitter, and then of course our regular accounts where we post information frequently. And maybe Kevin, if you can jump back in and join us and talk a little bit about some of the information that we've been posted related to Hurricane Laura, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell you what, there's never a dull moment when you have a live broadcast with anything. And I would expect Jay, he's pretty technical savvy, so he should be able to jump back on here shortly and get back to your question. But
Well, I
think
actually just got a text. I just got a text from him. He's coming back on, but let's just keep rolling.
All right, there you go. Well, I think Jeannie, you talk a little bit about what you brought up. I really like to emphasize those social media accounts, that Twitter or Facebook, because they are real-time live information. One of the questions I do get a lot from drone pilots are, where do I go so that I know when the FAA is going to announce this, or that they're going to brief us on this? And I say, look, just follow our social media accounts, because the team that Jeannie runs in our Office of Communication is fantastic. And they are extremely good at getting the word out, not only in a timely manner, but they plain language it so that our unique drone community has ability to understand, read it, and then take action upon that. I think we talk a lot of terms of acronyms all the time, and we're really trying to avoid some of that here. And our Office of Communication is really good at doing that. So again, I'm just going to hit the point home one more time. You see those social media accounts on your screen there. I very, very highly recommend that you do follow those accounts, because you will not get only information that's timely, but information that you can actually use. Really good accounts.
Thank you. I think Jay is with us. Jay, did you join?
I did.
Okay.
Excuse me. Thank you. Murphy's
Sure.
Law. You
I
know,
know. Maybe you can also talk about, we were just talking about some of the ways that we reach drone pilots, because we know they're not stalking the Federal Register, for example. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing to work with influencers and drone companies, and some of the other things that we're doing to reach sometimes a hard to reach audience.
Sure. So most of the drone pilots, whether they're recreational or commercial, are working with a company that's providing them a service, whether it's a service that files airspace authorizations for them, or collects NOTAMs or TFRs, general aeronautical information. And we partnered with a number of those to provide the Know Before You Fly app, which provides information there. And through those companies and others, and Jeannie's office helping us very much, we send out a number of messages about drones and about drone flying. Just to put drones by the numbers for those who aren't aware, we have approximately 1.7 million registered drones in the United States. So there are roughly 220,000 general aviation and roughly 6,000 transport class aircraft in the United States. So you can see, although they're new entrants, they're a very, very large community. We have approximately 400,000 commercial pilots. Think about that. And we also have about 1.2 recreational pilots. Excuse me, those are the registrations. We have 190,000 remote pilot certificates that we have issued. So it's a big community. It's, as Jeannie, as you've mentioned, and Kevin and Abby and the administrator, they live in a digital world, and we have to reach them in that digital world. So we try every means necessary, including partnering with those companies that provide them services, to provide additional information and messages. Back over to you, Jeannie.
Thank you, Jay. And we just had our first virtual UAS symposium.
Yes,
And that was a first for us, and we think it went very well in the all digital environment. How many attendees did we have, Jay?
We had over 1,500 attendees, and that's to a paid event. Last year, our live event was roughly 1,200. And we did not only sessions like this, but we also had a number of, they called them roundtables. They were meeting rooms, video chat rooms. They were very, very popular. Also live Q&As. And probably the biggest thing we learned, and Jeannie, you and I have talked about this many times, trying to reach this digital community, trying to reach this digital world, we really found them there. And we really realized, unlike the general aviation community, who wants to do something like a fly-in, like Oshkosh, or maybe Sun and Fun. This community meets each other in the digital world. So that virtual symposium has become our Oshkosh. We're very excited about the prospect of that.
That collaboration is so important. Making sure that we're having a two-way conversation with pilots, industry, app developers, and drone pilots when we talk about modernizing aeronautical information and data. So let's bring the gang back. I think they're all back. I see Abby. How about Kevin? Are you joining us? There you go.
Yeah.
So as well as education, Kevin, you've done a lot of webinars for drone pilots. What aeronautical information is most important for them to have access to?
Yeah, thanks, Jeannie, for that question. So what I can do is sort of give you, I think, some of the highlights of what information drone pilots really need to be aware of before they go flying. And this shouldn't be viewed as a prescriptive list. This is not a limiting list, but I think I'm going to hit the highlights here real quick. One is really kind of a topic that we've been having a discussion about all day today, which are NOTAMs, and that kind of rolls into temporary flight restrictions. I think from a drone pilot standpoint, one of the most critical things that they're going to need to be aware of in terms of aeronautical information is whether or not a temporary flight restriction has been established in their particular area. And I can't think of any more appropriate topic to have other than TFRs for today. We've got wildfires that are burning in Colorado and California. We just had a hurricane come ashore, and we have temporary flight restrictions up in Beaumont, Texas, and Lake Charles, Louisiana. And these flight restrictions have a very specific and critical importance, which is they're designed to let the aircraft go in to do the jobs they need to do to provide relief efforts or fire suppression efforts. And that is such a critical component of what we try to do to manage natural disasters in this country. And when we get an aircraft operating in that area, and that could be a manned aircraft that we don't think should be there, or a drone that shouldn't be there. And you've heard this saying before, when they're flying, or we shouldn't be, or if we're flying, they can't. So let's really pay attention to those temporary flight restrictions. And so I think you really want to hit that right away. As a drone pilot, pull up the NOTAM list and take a look at temporary flight restrictions every single time before you fly, because just because it wasn't there this morning doesn't mean it's not going to be there this afternoon. Things can change that quickly. So make sure you're aware of temporary flight restrictions. And then the other thing is really airspace related. And we've hit on this a lot. We have a whole YouTube series on airspace on our FAA YouTube channel. We've done a lot of webinars. I've hosted a lot of webinars. I've given a lot of presentations on airspace, and we keep bringing it up because it's so critically important. We've talked about this idea of we're all pilots. And I think it was Administrator Dixon mentioned that we are all pilots, and we're operating and navigating in our national airspace system together. We really need to understand the airspace component of that. Are you flying controlled airspace? Are you flying in uncontrolled airspace? Do you need an airspace authorization? So I think those would be my really two highlights. Check for TFRs and understand the airspace that you're flying in before you fly your drone.
That's a really good point, Kevin. And as Jay mentioned earlier, drone pilots are used to receiving data through an app, not a paper chart, not a static, not a PDF. And that's one of our goals with this modernization effort. We have to ensure that all users of the airspace can receive critical safety information in the format that they need it.
Yeah, absolutely.
This reminds me, Jeannie, thinking about airspace and this change to a digitized world, and the importance for UAS operators to have that digital information ingested, aeronautical information specifically ingested into their flight management systems, because drones don't read charts, and neither do drone pilots. I think there's somebody that you should interview now that really can speak to this from a lot of different experience that he's had, and that's Bill Stanton. So I'm gonna pop out here and give him some time with you.
That's right. Yes, Bill Stanton. He is the UAS lead for the integration of drones into the airspace, and he works in the air traffic organization. Bill, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Jeannie. Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. I am the UAS lead for integration for the air traffic organization. What that job entails is coordinating efforts across all of our service units, all of our directorates, which are many, and in making the effort to get these airspace authorizations out to UAS and to modernize the airspace systems. I lead integration efforts. They include rulemaking, policy, and procedures, and we're doing our best to move forward as one organization. My experience is primarily in the field and an operations background. Prior to this role, I've been the manager for operational integration for UAS and commercial space and air traffic services. I've been a lead investigator, operations manager, frontline manager, and controller. And a long time ago, I was a U.S. Marine. With that,
That's awesome. So former air traffic controller. Awesome. That's a great combination and a great real world experience to share with us today. Appreciate that field perspective. So can you tell us, Bill, why from an air traffic control perspective it's so important that new entrants like drone pilots are aware of, follow, and understand aeronautical information, including NOTAMs and TFRs?
I think I would add to what Administrator Dixon and what Kevin talked about, a little bit of what Jay hit on in some of those aspects, but our primary concern is safety of flight for not only the drone operators, but the pilots and passengers in the air, the flying public itself, the people and property on the ground. We are primarily concerned with the safety and security of those folks in mind. Abby and everyone Abby talked about TFRs last week. We've hit on them a lot this week. I think that it's important to mention that they are a very important tool to air traffic in order to keep our airspace safe. As Kevin mentioned, we do this for many reasons. Some examples, primarily that most folks are familiar with, sporting events. Drones are prohibited from flying in and around those sporting events, usually within a 3-mile radius. For an hour before and an hour after each one of those events. This is for safety and security reasons, and I think that we can all agree it's a very important reason to adhere to those. It's important, as Kevin pointed out, before you go and get your airspace authorization, you take a look and see where these TFRs are active. You may remember a few weeks ago, a game between the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Minnesota Twins. The game was delayed because a drone was operating in and around the stadium. Although no one was injured in this incident, I think it highlights the need to look for this information, take a look at the NOTAMs, identify where the TFRs are, and be compliant. You are able to get an airspace authorization, but part of that airspace authorization is the requirement to go and look and see where these TFRs are. That's very important to note. As Administrator Dixon and Kevin had pointed out, this is a very professional environment, and it is important that all drone operators consider themselves a part of the NAS and contribute to the safety of it. So some of the other TFRs that we use them to support, as Kevin pointed out, wildfire missions. These operations have been grounded on numerous occasions due to drones being in that airspace. They create an unsafe operating circumstance for the pilots that are flying those planes and for the people and property on the ground. So when drones are in the air, other emergency responders can't be. I think that's very important to note, and that can have catastrophic consequences. Another very visible need for TFRs is in support of other emergency responses like today, Hurricane Laura. As Kevin pointed out, currently there are 2 TFRs that are in effect, and we mentioned in Beaumont and Lafayette, but it's important to note that as conditions change and as the weather changes, more emergency responders and linear infrastructure and critical infrastructure responders will be out and about requesting the use of that airspace. Again, where you are flying, those emergency responders can't fly. So as an air traffic controller and as keeping the operation in mind, these TFRs serve as a very important mechanism both to the flying community on the ground the drone operators, the pilots in the air, and to the air traffic operators running the system. Very important, especially in crowded airspace such as near airports. And I want to emphasize again, very important to our emergency responders. If you're up in the air and operating, they can't be in the sky. Back to you, Jeannie.
Thank you, Bill. And those examples really drive home the need for us as an agency and the broader aerospace industry to work together on educating folks about airspace data and critical safety information. So thank you for that. Kevin mentioned the drone zone earlier. Can you talk a little bit about that, Bill, and how you can get airspace authorizations through LAANC?
Certainly. LAANC is one of our most successful applications and one of our earliest efforts to digitize information.
And can you define LAANC? I'm sorry, Bill. I said an acronym. Sorry about that.
Quite all right. I think that we use them so often that they're second nature to us. And I forget that the public may not know what LAANC is. So LAANC is the low altitude authorization and notification capability. LAANC is an app that has replaced many of our analog and manual processes for airspace access. Previously, you could make your request in drone zone, and it could, take weeks or months to get those authorizations back to you. With the creation of LAANC and digitizing that information, we've been able to move to almost a real-time approval of these requests. What does LAANC provide? LAANC provides drone pilots with access to our controlled airspace at and below 400 feet. It's not guaranteed. They are in conjunction with previously determined safe altitudes from our air traffic controllers and managers out in the field. They can provide operators awareness of where they can fly and where they cannot fly. And we also work collaboratively with our government and industry partners to provide aeronautical information through LAANC. We may approve or reject requests for airspace authorization based on several factors, and you can get that information in LAANC as well. Our air traffic controllers through LAANC have a visibility of where and when drones are operating. So very important data sets, and the numbers of authorizations continue to grow. We're well over 300, probably 350,000 authorizations approved in LAANC, and that is a very significant milestone for us. We recognize that the best way to provide safe and easy access to airspace is through our digital apps. It provides the user access 24/7. And that is important to note, because in the analog and manual way that we used to have to process these things, it was basically a Monday through Friday, 8 to 4 kind of operation. Very people-oriented, very labor-intensive. So a great advancement, and we champion the use of LAANC.
Okay, well, thank you, Bill. And that's a great example of how we are working with our stakeholders to digitize aerospace information and make it available according to what the customer needs. And we've made a lot of progress with modernization, but there's more to come. So Abby, please tell us today what aeronautical information has been digitized and how can our attendees access it right now?
I'd be happy to, Jeannie. So I'll have the control room bring up a slide to help out. So I'd like to start with temporary flight restriction.
That's not my dog, by the way.
Yeah, those are my dogs. So mine woke up. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I'll start with TFR data. And again, temporary flight restriction.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. That the slide doesn't seem to define the acronym. Okay. As it really does, this really does seem to be one of the most critical pieces of our data for the audience today, and today of all days, especially considering all the temporary flight restrictions. So you can access the data in a few different ways. The one way you can do it is through something called NOTAM search, and it's the FAA's single human interface for NOTAMs. And it's, you just dial in a URL. We'll put that URL in the chat box for you. We also have a website that we graphically display NOTAMs on a map. To get that, you can go to tfr.faa.gov, and we'll also put that in the chat. And for our super data gurus, our machine-to-machine connection provides temporary flight restrictions via the NOTAM distribution service, or again, one of our wonderful acronyms, NDS. This machine interface is available to the public via FAA's SCDS, not kidding, SWIM, and it's a system-wide information management cloud distribution service. That's why we call it SCDS. And we'll put that in the chat as well. In last week's session, we talked extensively about the changes we've made to the TFR data. I'd like to highly encourage any of you that are viewing today to go back and watch that recording on the FAA's YouTube channel, and we can post that also in the chat.
Very good. That we have a great YouTube channel, by the way. So thanks
Yes,
for reminding
indeed.
folks about that. So I think we're ready to do our question and answer session. Again, this is supposed to be an exchange of information. And as the administrator said, we want to make sure we're getting input from the users of the data. So if you're watching this on Zoom, I know we have a few questions that have already come in, or through the live stream. Please send us your questions in through the chat function of the respective platform that you're on. So let's bring the rest of the team back.
We're just
Okay.
missing Jay. And
Just
so
missing
Jeannie,
Jay.
you know that disruption thing you said?
I know.
So we've
I know.
had every one of them happen today. So this has been kind of a hoot.
And I even heard a cat earlier. I don't have a cat, but I
don't
heard
either.
a cat earlier. So let's see. Oh, here's a question for Kevin. Okay, Kevin, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. I'm a public safety officer. How can I fly my drone to support our rescue missions?
Yeah, another great and very timely question, Jeannie.
Yes.
Thanks. We have a whole process designed to facilitate those types of operations that are going to utilize unmanned aircraft in support of relief efforts. And that could be firefighting or wildfire suppression. It could be the hurricane relief efforts. The process is called the Special Governmental Interest Process, or may I use an acronym? SGI. The SGI process is detailed on our website, but really just sort of break it down so you can understand what it's for. It's for those legitimate first responder operations that are taking place in areas that may be under a temporary flight restriction to gain access to that airspace and to fly the missions that they need to fly in a timely, time-critical manner. And then many times, I believe we advertise a 24-hour turnaround, but I think our actual true turnaround time, I've heard from some proponents to be almost as quick as an hour, where they use that process and they submit their request to get into a particular locked down airspace, if you will, and within an hour, they're cleared to operate within that airspace. So the Special Governmental Interest, or SGI process, is a fantastic tool for those operators.
Got it. Got it. Oh, here's a good question for Abby. When
Okay.
will NOTAM modernization be finished?
Well, Jeannie, that's a great question. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we're going to always be improving, but our major modernization efforts, we're hoping to have completed sometime in on or around the fourth quarter, or maybe the first of FY22. Or maybe the first quarter of FY23. There's a lot of system integration that has to go on to really wrap it up. But in the meantime, almost every aeronautical chart cycle, and for those of you not familiar with chart cycles, it's about once a month, we've got updates to the system. So you're going to see continuous improvement now through January of 2023.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Question for Jay. Did Jay join us?
He's there.
Okay, Jay. Is there a NOTAM app for drone pilots? How can I find out where I can and cannot fly?
Sure, great question. So as I mentioned earlier, there's the Know Before You Fly, and most of the services that drone pilots use will do the same thing, provide you with NOTAM information. But if you don't have one of those services, just look for Know Before You Fly, and they'll provide you with that information.
Okay, thank you. Bill, can you tell us about UTM from the operational view?
Certainly, I think that'll tie. I'd like to tie in the website or the link to LAANC, also to tie into Jay's question about where you can fly and where you can get those authorizations. We talked a little bit about LAANC, www.faa.gov/go/LAANC, LAANC, and with that, it'll give you all the information you need for the use of LAANC. And with that said, that was our initial go at, or we often refer to LAANC as our first steps towards UTM. Basically a system where we are authorizing UAS flight with a governance of certain criteria. As we described, or as I had described earlier, below 400 feet, in concurrence with the rule, within visual line of sight, not interfering with patterns and giving way to other manned flight and UAS. With those things in mind, it creates a set of circumstances where a drone operator can get into airspace and operate. With UTM, it goes a little bit further. Obviously, the description will be a system better managed, more information sharing. And I think that is also an important part to add to what we're talking about today. As we move into a digital world, all of those things will be down the road fed into a singular system meant for this application. Basically, better drone access to airspace and safe access to airspace by sharing of information and safety information.
And UTM stands for what, Bill?
Thank you.
UAS traffic management. So I probably should have hit on that. More accurate. So we have ATM, air traffic management, and that really is the legacy that you would see in aviation today. Most people think of piloted aircraft and passengers in them, but UTM, UAS traffic management, will be the next step in this UAS world.
Thank you, sir. Kevin, here's a good question. What is the difference between having your drone unlocked by a manufacturer and getting an airspace authorization?
That is a really good question. And there are two very, very different elements of flying your drone. So let me start with the sort of the unlock feature. Depending on the manufacturer of your drone, a lot of them will bake in what a lot of us say is geofencing. They will actually prevent your drone from lifting off the ground if you're in airspace that they feel that you shouldn't be in for one particular reason or another. Now, for very good reasons, drone manufacturers allow those geofences to be overridden or unlocked in many cases. The problem that we see a little bit coming up lately is that some people think that the unlocking of their drone's geofencing is the permission they need to operate in that airspace. And I think Bill would agree with me wholeheartedly that that is not the case. When you're going to go fly your drone and you check the airspace around your area and you find out that you're in a particular group of airspace, whether that's controlled airspace or Bravo airspace, whatever you like to think of it as, where it's telling you need an authorization, your first stop should be some of the programs that Bill has already talked about. And that is go to LAANC, get your airspace authorization, or if LAANC isn't functional for that particular area you're trying to go, utilize Drone Zone to get your airspace authorization, because it's the FAA airspace authorization that allows you to fly in that particular area in accordance with the rule. Now, once you get that FAA airspace authorization, then go ahead and unlock your drone or remove the geofencing so that your actual drone will fly in that particular area. But that, I think, is the best way I can describe the very two different elements of flying your drone in maybe a controlled airspace or another type of airspace where you're locked out of.
So if I get my BFR in a manned aircraft, will that count towards my Part 107 renewal?
Okay, so switching gears a little bit, we're talking about currency for airmen. So what we do is Part 107, if you're a remote pilot flying under there, you're well aware that every 24 calendar months, you need to establish aeronautical knowledge recency. And there are a few different pathways for you to do that. What Jeannie just brought up is really interesting, because if you're also a Part 61 pilot, which means you fly manned aircraft, and you're current for flying manned aircraft, does that mean you're automatically current as a Part 107 drone pilot? And the answer is no. You still would need to go establish your aeronautical knowledge recency per 107.65. And I don't have an expectation everyone has the rules memorized, but that's the rule that says, hey, look, every 24 calendar months, you need to either go take a recurrent test at a testing facility, or if you're a Part 61 or manned aircraft pilot, you can go online to FAAsafety.gov and complete your online recurrency there. But there are two different types of recurrency. You will need to establish currency under both if you're going to fly Part 61 and Part 107.
Thank you, sir. Abby, how will modernization of aeronautical data benefit the drone community?
Well, so I'd like to answer the question. I'd also like to have Jay pop in because he may have more insight, because Jay and I have worked together over the years on this very issue. One way, and I think I had mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I want to definitely, the question came in, so let's re-emphasize it. Is that as we digitize and make the aeronautical information sortable, filterable, and machine readable, it's going to really benefit the drone operators, because they're not using paper charts, and the NOTAM information such as TFRs, having that in a digital format that can be assumed won't overwhelm the system. Jay, wasn't there a problem with some of the way that TFRs were formatted, crashing the systems of UAS?
There were some UAS software problems with ingesting TFRs.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would describe it as crashing them. Using the word crash with an aircraft always makes me nervous.
It's a good point.
But there are, to your point, there are several ways that the lack of machine readable, sortable, filterable temporary flight restrictions or airspace maps make it very difficult for either the drone pilot or the company that's providing services to the drone pilot. Because what they're really doing is they're taking our charts and attempting to make them machine readable on their own. And when we did our paper charts, they really weren't designed so that they could be overlaid in a digital world.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would have areas where there would be gaps between things, or they would overlap, and the machine didn't know how to interpret that. And so the machine would have problems displaying it either correctly, or it would just say, I can't process it. So you're exactly right. The fact that the digital aeronautical information, or the aeronautical information, is not a digital native format makes it very difficult either for the aircraft to process it, or the systems that people and, the operators rely on to process it.
Yeah, I would just say that just reminds me that in April of 2021, all of those visual flight rules or VFR sectional charts for people that are more familiar with aeronautics will all be digitized, and they'll be on the same chart cycle. I think that's going to be a huge gain for the UAS community for that very reason. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, here's a question for Bill. What other types of new entrants do you envision seeing in the near future, and how is the FAA preparing to work them into the NAS?
I think that is a very interesting, very valid question. I was on a panel earlier in the week, and I kind of described it as this. Most people envision these types of operations. Aviation, have you ever seen the video of the person with the wings that they made out of wood and fabric and jumped off a building and went straight down? And that's certainly the very beginning, earliest concepts. And I think that a lot of people, whenever they think of UAS operations, they envision something out of a movie, Blade Runner, where these vehicles are dodging in and out of city buildings and parking in these large buildings, large towers where they live. So I think on the far end, passenger delivery, closer to us is the package delivery and the lower altitude UTM type systems. I think on the spectrum, the very edge, out on the fringe, we've had some discussions from some operators out there that are talking about UAS, using UAS as an early launch or an initial launch vehicle for satellites. So as we start talking about UAS, we dip into a little bit of commercial space. So there's some very interesting things that are being proposed, some very interesting new technologies that are out there. Looking forward.
That's very cool. I want your job, Bill, but I'm not qualified. So I think that's a wrap. We're getting close to our end of our time here. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and experience. And we'll post the answers to the questions that we didn't get to on FAA.gov at the end of the series. And speaking of that, so Abby, how about reminding us what the final session in the series will address, which is coming up next week?
Yeah, Janie, I cannot believe we're at the end of 5 of 6, and so the series is nearly complete. So our final session is definitely going to be worth tuning into for sure. It's going to be next Thursday, again at 1 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be talking about what's ahead for aeronautical information and notices to airmen, to include what we're doing related to application programming interfaces, or APIs. And for the people in the drone community, APIs are very much something that they're familiar with and appreciate. I know, Jeannie, you have been a huge proponent of that. We heard at loud and clear at November's Data Optimization Summit, the APIs are very much needed to simplify how you access FAA data as your authoritative source. So if you have not registered for that session, I hope you really will do so.
Well, thank you, Abby. And that's all the time we have for this week, everybody. So my many thanks to you, our audience, the dogs who are in the background. I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. It's been fun preparing for this session, and I'm so honored to be a part of this series and working with all of you. So until next week, we're signing off. Thank you very much. See everybody soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you later.